into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, 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 not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America.
Coming in live at Goddamn America Radio. We're back again, live and direct, in your headphones. That's right.
That's
hey,
right.
Everybody.
I sorry, I wasn't sure if I should do my own.
I'm not done yet.
Okay, go ahead. I wasn't sure what voice to do, but you can cap it off.
The Goddamn America Radio podcast. Hello. Hey, everybody. Hi, what's up? It's me, Alex. I'm here for another week of Goddamn America, here with everyone's favorite co-host, Anders Lee.
Anders Lee here, from the 21st century. Despite what you may have just heard, and despite what you're hearing now, I'm told often that I have a voice that sounds like it's from the 1930s.
You're a 20th century man.
Yeah, in a way. That's what, of course, we agree, the most important thing for a socialist organization to have is a theory of the 20th century.
Yes.
More so than having a line on Palestinian rights or, what your national campaigns are in 2022 is theorizing about the 20th century, which is, again, we will stress this. One of the things you will deal with if you quit DSA to join some other org will be debating theories of the 20th century instead
Absolutely.
of doing
taking shots.
Yeah.
Would Austria-Hungary have beaten the Nazis if they had a separate peace with the Allies in World War I?
Okay, now you're speaking my language and making me want to join if we're going to go over counterfactuals. But
it's very exciting. There's a lot of counterfactuals to go over. Another important theory you have to have is what food Jake Flores ate that is destroying his intestinal lining today in the last 2 days as he shits out his doo-doo ass and head and mouth.
I'm thinking it's some sort of seafood burrito. He has food poisoning. And apparently Bobert's bar grill shooters gave people food poisoning.
Yes.
Maybe he ate there. I've wanted them to open a Brooklyn location so I can work there. If I do have to go back into the service industry, unemployed right now, I would like it to be armed.
A situation where you get a gun.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a chili. I know Jake has maybe joked about this, but he stays eating chili and preparing chilies in all sorts of hodgepodge ways, and I could see a chili going rogue and maybe defeating him this way.
Yeah, depending on how the beef is prepared, how it, if it was out too long or something like that, I guess.
Beef is like the number one way to catch a bacteria.
Pork. I think pork is actually worse.
That's true.
That's why people don't eat it. Some people. Part of the reason.
It is forbidden. It's wrong and it's a sin. And you know what? Depending on your religious background, that can really affect how you view politics and the modern world, which is why we're opening the show today with an exciting new article from Tablet Magazine.
Yeah, so, we're going to be discussing working groups today in DSA, one of which, of course, is the BDS working group. We will get to that. But there's another new exciting working group, and that is the DSA Anti-Immigrant Landlord of Color working group, which has been very active in NYC, apparently, as Mr. Leo Leibovitz has reported on in Tablet Mag.
In his article, the DSA comes for immigrant landlords of color.
They're
and
coming
then, like
for
a guy,
him.
It says comes for here, Anders. I'm looking right at comes for.
I know, I'm repeating it. I'm underscoring it.
It's going to have their... And then it's like a guy in a hat looking like, don't come for me. No, I've done nothing wrong.
Yeah, he looks innocent in the photo. He is a landlord who's in, I guess it looks like he's fixing up a place in the photograph.
Yeah, he's not like your landlord. He actually will show up and repair the house.
Supposedly, but he's very mad. Mr. Lincoln Eccles is his name. at having to pay fines after he fixes things. So things will be unrepaired, will go unrepaired for a while. And he'll finally get around to repairing them and then have to pay a fine for not repairing them early. Sounds like.
I'm pretty sure
says,
it says in here he owns 100 units.
Well, doesn't he come from a landlord family?
One of the finest families you can come from.
So there's a photo of a fucked up wall in one of his units. There's like scaffolding and just hoses coming out of the wall. It looks like egg cartons. And the subline says, new rent regulations have left Eckley's unable to make repairs to his building. Then sell the fucking building. I don't believe it for a second that he actually can't afford it.
Anders, I didn't realize you were in this working group.
I'm starting it right now. But he had a communique with shout out my favorite New York State Senator Julia Salazar, and she said he basically told her like, "Oh, I can't afford this," and she sent back a message that was basically like, "Tough. Your job is to provide amenities." So he's mad that he has to pay the system for violations. And she's like, that's the point. You should have to pay to remove violations that you're responsible for. It's a very small penalty to pay for the suffering you inflict on people who live in your janky building. Do your job instead of spending all day trolling us on Twitter. I know he's the landlord in this case, but I think here he really is the one who got owned.
That's really well put.
Thank you.
I see why you're now chair of this new and controversial committee that you can tell is real and left-leaning because of how many words it is.
Right. Yeah. What would that sound like as a acronym? Let's see. Ilcookwoog.
I don't know,
Immigrant
bro.
landlord of color.
You're the one who works there. Write it out.
Elk. Anti-immigrant landlord of color working group. Elk-woog. There we go.
Let's get into it. It's the DSA episode. Everyone this week screaming, yelling about DSA stuff. We said we can do that. That's kind of what we do on our podcast.
Yup. It's not happy times this past week. It's been a bad week. I guess a couple weeks really. Things have been bad for a while, but what really kicked off this this series of disasters, if you will, was there was a member of the National Political Committee, and kind of give people an idea of what that is. It's an elected body by the membership to rule on things. They are our representatives. So
they're like the admins of the group.
Yeah. Right. And there's a convention every 2 years where there are like hundreds of delegates from all the chapters. And they meet in a city and decide to hammer out a platform and bylaws and all that stuff. And then they
distribute the Reddit gold.
That's right. And then we elect, what is it, every year? We elect a National Political Committee. Don't quote me on that. But recently there's been turmoil. I mean, there's always been turmoil in both of these things, but one of the members of the NPC stepped down a while ago, reluctantly, but he tweeted out a sort of a tasteless joke that's coming from me about AIDS, and had to step down.
Yeah, they don't like when you do that when you're like in an elected position of power. Right. A lot of the time.
Yeah.
Usually just when you're just like a piece of shit in a bar, you can do that.
Get away with that. Right. It's not, no one's saying he should. Well, I don't know.
If you're in the year 2008, people love when you do that.
Yeah. But even then, it probably shouldn't be mixing comedy. And this is, again, why we will not accept any nomination. If we were elected to the NPC, we would not serve because we
would not serve.
Clowns.
We are lining up behind Anthony Jeselnik to spearpoint our committee.
Right. So that kind of kicked things off. And then, boom, big other surprise. The Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Working Group, which, of course, refers to a series of tactics that people levy or wish to levy against the state of Israel was dechartered and dissolved by the NPC, National Political Committee, and put under the International Committee. And just to sort of dissect the terminology, might be a bit inside baseball, but a lot of this episode will be, frankly, sort of inside baseball, but we'll try our best to keep people up on the different terms and things.
Look, we got to talk about it, man. If you're listening to a socialist podcast in 2022, start playing baseball. Get inside. It's great.
I'm not kidding. I believe there is some DSA baseball society, or I don't know if it would count as a working group. Or people want to get baseball games going.
Society?
Not a society. But actually, Bernie is
separate from us all.
Bernie is holding hearings, and he's very mad about the state of baseball. Anyway, so a working group is like an issue-focused subgroup, basically. So there's also a healthcare working group. There's immigration justice working group, racial justice, defund. There are local working groups. So your chapter. Right now, I'm in MDC DSA. I was in NYC, probably going back to that. There are working groups within the chapter that are locally focused. And then there are national working groups. And a lot of chapters, if I'm not mistaken, do have BDS working groups. And those have not been touched, but the national one has been dissolved, or it was dechartered.
Right. Which is all to say, a bunch of people who actually do a lot of the organizing and activism were then frustrated and upset with the organization and started leaving very publicly in a way that is bad to happen to your big socialist organization. So we thought we should talk about it.
Right. And there are a lot of different ways to cut this thing. I get, obviously we don't believe in objective journalism. I went into these series of interviews with more of a skewed perspective, and I come out now much more ecumenical. I don't know what to think, honestly, if I'm being totally frank. And this is, again, why I'm not in a position to make decisions and come down on things that will hurt people one way or the other. Call me a weasel, call me a coward. I am, just don't have the intellect for it. I'm sorry. I can argue with liberals and conservatives and opponents, ultra-leftist opponents of DSA. I'm a partisan for the organization. The internal stuff I try to keep track of, but a lot of the time it does go over my head, and it's frankly just hard to make up my mind. It's like being in the video store again in 1999 and not being able to choose between the Babysitter's Club and the latest James Bond flick. It's decisions.
It's almost exactly the same as that. Right. I went in a paid Russian agent and left more devoted than ever to rebuilding the great Kiev Russian Empire, stronger than it's ever been before.
That'll happen. But so there are a lot of perspectives out there. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get each one of them. Excuse me. We have talked to two members of the NPC, but there's a lot of other voices out there. We tried very hard, Alex did, to get a working group member from the BDS working group on the show to share their perspective. I also wanted to talk to some other people, because there's, like I said, a lot of different perspectives here. This dates back, and we're going to have to go over this a few different times, so just bear with me here. Jamal Bowman, as we know, you may not know, voted to fund Iron Dome, money that was not actually needed, that they didn't ask for, I believe, as well as went on a trip to Israel, and I should mention the Palestinian territories. There was frankly, the trip was a mixed bag, in my opinion. But doing things like taking photos with Naftali Bennett is not, I think, acceptable in an anti-apartheid organization. I totally understand that. And he did, and I had forgotten this during that dust-up. He did actually vote for just straight-up IDF funding a few months before this, which kind of went under the radar, and then this stuff bubbled up and it became a big controversy. And the debate has really been how to react to this, and this is one of the frustrations that we'll kind of get into from a lot of members. And this has been I'll be upfront. One of my frustrations as well is that it's constantly being framed by some comrades as you're either, unless you're for the maximalist expulsion of Bowman immediately and all that goes with that, then you are on the side of the Israelis and you're a Zionist. And that's just not a useful way of looking at this, I don't think. We've all been tarred by, most of us, I assume, have been tarred by Zionists in the past, and I'm not trying to do a woe is me thing, but, during the early parts of the pandemic, I did a segment for my job at the time about how shitty it's been for Palestinians during COVID because they've been treated even worse than usual by the Israeli government. And of course, I was called by some idiot I went to high school with, compared me to Goebbels, and that's just going to happen. You're going to be called a Nazi sympathizer and an anti-Semite. Yeah, he was not a fan of Goebbels.
Okay.
And like with that in mind, I would hope that people don't recreate that sort of dynamic from the other side. It's just so demoralizing to see people like Asa Winstanley, who's done great work for Electronic Intifada, literally comparing what the NPC has done, which there are a lot of problems with that we'll get into. He called it Nazi tactics. That is heinous for someone to say that on the left about another left-wing organization. And it's just, it's justified by, well, DSA's a front, it's Zionist-backed and FBI-backed and all this crap. And I think people like that I just don't know how to respond to that. It's just really sad to see, and it's unserious, and it's shitty. And that's the way things have gone on both ends of this, right? There have been accusations from the other side that's more pro Bowman. There's kind of been some hand waving, like, oh, well, if you don't agree with us, then you probably don't do any work anyway. And that's not fair. Although there has been an issue with how much of a focus Bowman has taken. And I think you can argue that has come at the expense of other BDS and pro-Palestinian organizing.
So that's what we're talking about today, okay? I made a lot of messages, texts, phone calls throughout the week. People do not want to talk on the record at large.
Yeah.
A lot of rejections in a row. Don't message me asking why I didn't get an interview from your friend. They didn't want to talk to me.
If I could, I'm sorry, I just have to add one quick thing.
Okay.
From a perspective we didn't share. Just to make sure we have as many sides of this included. There is another member of the NPC who is Arab American, is a gay guy, and I don't, that may or may not play a role in this. I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but he was called by the BDS working group. He was called a traitor to Muslims in a meeting, and he was told that he was haram. And I don't know if that has to do with his sexuality or not, but that's the type of thing where, again, this is a completely legitimate debate, but throwing out those kinds of accusations, calling people Nazis and, Zionists, that really is not moving us forward. So I just want to make sure to mention that. And of course, there's been bad blood on both sides. So just with that in mind.
Before we get into any of the interviews, right, I just thought it might be worth a minute of our time to kind of take a step back and look at what's up with the Democratic Socialists of America in 2022. A lot of us joined 2016, 2017, either during or post the first Bernie campaign, and there's been a few changes since then. For one, according to the website, we're up to almost 92,000 members, or it could be more than that now, which is like by far the biggest socialist organization in the U.S. And historically, since Eugene Debs' party, Socialist Party of America, over 100 years ago.
Right.
So it's a big accomplishment to have this big friggin' tank we get to move around politics, even if it doesn't really do much yet. And why is it important to have a big socialist party? Because you could do stuff with it. You can you can throw in social democratic reforms into your big capitalist democracy. You can push back against the insane groups that currently govern our entire country. And then in theory, and most importantly, when you get the machine big enough, you could take power, which is what the whole game is about. So it's pretty important that you have a machine up and running. And it's a big problem that people are leaving it right now because, I mean, even with all these valid criticisms coming out this week, this is the only party we have like this in America right now. And I bring up Socialist Party of America from the 20th century, right? Because I think if you look at what happened to them, it's a pretty important warning to stay together right now because they kind of peak in membership in the 19-teens and then rapidly decline after speaking out on World War I and the following government purge in the Palmer raids in 1919. We're not in a world war right now, but...
Not yet.
We're in the middle of something right now, and we're almost the only public voice pushing back on it.
It's getting ugly, yeah.
Your liberal friends are kind of looking at you cockeyed. It might be a good time to kind of stick together.
Right. We now are, it's a very frustrating situation to be in. Not that it wasn't frustrating before and that it won't be in the future, but it's an odd position to be in because for so long the left has been completely irrelevant. Now we're just mostly irrelevant, right? We do have this close to a mass organization, and it is large enough to warrant a response from the White House, right? Which is pushing back on our statement, and we're not going to litigate this on this episode. I think it was a perfectly fine statement and a strong one on the war in Ukraine. We condemn Putin's invasion. We also condemn NATO, and we stand with our commitment to supporting the abolition of NATO because it's not a necessary institution and it does more harm than good.
Yeah, it's actually not a complicated socialist position to leave NATO. That is one of the very few things, and something we're going to talk about in these interviews, which is, can we expect American socialists to abide by really basic socialist principles?
Yeah, in the face of a new Red Scare and possibly a new Cold War, those are all things we need to discuss and have an ongoing dialogue about. And
this is the last thing I wanted to say before we get into it. We know because of the internet and because of public information from the 20th century, the forces of reaction love to see a party split.
Right.
We have the COINTELPRO documents, before they go out assassinating Black Panther members or doing mass arrests and locking everybody up and doing these elaborate Red Scare campaigns that take a lot of effort and time. The FBI is happy to just go in your org and just kind of cause dissent like a little pixie run around the works.
Let's not do their work for them.
All you have to do is not split, people. All you have to do is not split. With that said, we're going to talk to some members of the National Political Committee who are, would you say, the main people taking heat right now? The guys everybody is mad at?
The NPC?
Yeah.
I would say so, yeah. It appears they have pissed people off now on both sides because they made the decision and then they reversed it. So a lot of heat.
Yeah, so hopefully by putting out this episode, we can get some of that heat and make enough of you denounce us as fascists online. And that's what this has all been about. And so we want to cut to that now.
All right, let's hit it.
We are now here live for our interview with Jenbo from the DSA NPC. Welcome to the show, the inimitable Jenbo.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Live in the cut.
Not live exactly, but
it was live for us
in this moment right now. But yeah.
Okay, I was having anxiety, and now I'm a little better.
No. We will edit everything you say into a position you don't hold.
Yeah, we're going to be pretty much crafting your opinions wholesale once this wraps up. I just thought that was an expression people use, like live in the cut.
All right.
They do when they're live in the cut, but...
And, now that we're talking about it, it makes a lot of sense. Well, I don't want to get stuck on that. We're going to go right into the drama here. Big turbulent week for DSA. Everybody's talking about the BDS working group and the dechartering vote taken against them. You voted against dechartering the BDS-WG. Why did you come to that vote?
So when all of this happened, there's been conflict with the BDS working group at the NPC since probably November and December. And it all came to a head in February over a tweet thread. But in between, there were no conversations with the BDS working group to try and, mediate any conversations about what happened in, the end of the year, to try and come to some sort of compromise. No, that's not the right word. To try and actually build something together. I truly believe that the BDS Palestine Solidarity Working Group should be the political arm of DSA that tackles these issues. And it seemed odd that we were sort of icing them out and not talking to them while continuing this work. And so when this item came up, there was just a really quick call to action. There was no outreach to say hey, there's this tweet that has some problems. We have some information. You have other information. Let's figure out what the disconnect here is. It was just automatic punitive measures that didn't resolve anything, that didn't get to the bottom of why we both had different information. And I just thought it wasn't intentional or good political leadership, so I voted against it.
Well, and I want to make sure to cover this so it doesn't get lost in the sauce, but tweet thread in question, what did it say? What about it was arguably inaccurate? And if you could settle something else, which I've been having a hard time sort of nailing down, there was a request for the BDS working group to hand over their passwords to the NPC or to the comms, forgive me. And I'm hearing just different things about whether or not they actually complied with that or whether they were cooperating with that request.
Sure. So by way of background, in November, Congressman Bowman had met with J Street and taken a trip to Israel. And previously to that, he had voted for funding for the Iron Dome. And this was obviously not in line with a lot of the principles. There's not in line with socialist principles. I don't know why I'm equivocating on that. And we had a series of meetings with him where he promised the National Political Committee certain conditions for re-endorsement. There was a call for his expulsion, a call for censure, and a couple other things revoking his current endorsement. And so we had a series of meetings. We had a meeting with the BDS Palestine Solidarity Working Group in November, where he made certain promises to them that he wouldn't do in the future. He had a meeting with the NPC where he made certain promises to us. And one of these was that he would take his name off of the Israel Normalizations Bill. He had told this to the BDS working group in November, and then he later told this to the NPC in a separate meeting. And so when he did take his name off of the bill, some NPC members were quick to take credit for this and say, look, your calls for expulsion were illegitimate. We made this happen. This is a pivotal point in Palestinian liberation. And it felt like a really big slight to the BDS working group because they're like, no, we already knew he was doing this. You guys didn't do this. And then it should have been a slight to all of us because he said he did this because of J Street publicly. And
I'm sorry, what was this bill? If you could just briefly explain what the bill was.
Yeah, so it was the Israel Normalizations Bill. It was, I'm trying to remember all of the parts of it that were in there. Hold on one second, look at my notes. I don't get this wrong, and then everybody attacks me.
We can, I guess that the details of it aren't super important, but it was a bill to normalize Israel, if you will, and he was supporting it, and then is no longer supporting it. Okay.
Right. So he had told the BDS working group in November that, I'm planning on removing my name, and he told them that he was going to do this when it was logistically feasible, and that the reason that he had put his name on there in the first place was because something like 3,000 verified constituents had asked him to co-sponsor. The BDS working group tweeted that, he only removed his name after redistricting was done to take his constituency out of a place that heavy side his constituency. And the NPC members are operating under the information that this was unrelated to constituency and it had to do with support from coalition partners. So that was a big discrepancy between the two, where one was the BDS work group is under the impression that removal was based on redrawing of districting lines, and the NPC is basing it off of him needing support from coalition partners to do this. And so that's like a big point of tension. Like Comrade Bowman hasn't said either way, which was the contributing factor. It could have been both. It could have been neither. The only thing that I've seen him give credit to publicly is his travel or his talks with J Street for this. There's also the NPC members took offense at a phrase where he says that he came out explicitly against BDS and funded weapons to Israel. Things that he communicated that he would continue to do so. But to the NPC, Comrade Bowman had said that, you know, he's committed to not doing this, to not funding Israel's military. And I think that's like also a point of contention where the BDS working group, I don't know if this was just using his past actions to create a narrative, or if it was, I doubt that he had said in a meeting with them, like, and I continue to do so. But the NPC was like, no, he said he wasn't going to. All of this is frustrating right now because he has publicly said in a press release that if he were asked to fund the Iron Dome again, he would. So it's sort of like a weird, I don't know what he's saying, but I think as like the BDS work group said, this is like should be the floor for any socialist not to fund this. But at the time, the NPC saw this as unfairly attacking a congressman who had said, or our comrade who had said that he was committed to not funding things like the Iron Dome.
Okay, and I kind of want to nail something else down, this part of it down as well, because and it's another discrepancy that, you know, I feel like a lot of this is just people talking with their wires crossed. But in one of the statements made by one of the NPC members who stepped down, people can find out who that is if they really want to. I believe he said in the resignation letter that Bowman had reversed his vote and is now cast a vote more recently against funding the Iron Dome. Was that accurate or no?
Yes, he funded on a bill that had multiple parts in it, and so he voted no against funding for an Iron Dome, but then he qualified it by putting out a press statement saying that if the Iron Dome vote were separate, he would have voted for it.
Okay, I see what you mean. All right.
To take this conversation a step back for a second, out of Jamal Bowman's specific conflict, it seems in general like the NPC and working group are not communicating optimally, and that's sort of where a lot of this is coming from. So I'm checking my email, and I see an exciting new DSA newsletter saying the dechartering of the group from last week is now reversed.
Mm-hmm.
What can we attribute to that? Was that mostly a petition, or was there outside pro-Palestinian groups putting any pressure on the org? What do you think about the reversal of the decision?
I don't know what to think because the NPC hasn't discussed any of this together as a group. That was put out by the chair saying, I think we should reverse it due to unforeseen circumstances, which I don't agree with at all. These were all foreseen circumstances. This is like a self-created crisis that we're in. It was just put up, and then people were like, yeah, I agree. We haven't discussed as a group the political fallout, the hasty way we made our decisions. We haven't discussed the petitions. We haven't discussed the email campaigns. We haven't discussed what chapters have said or coalition partners have said. I can speculate on why rationale that's been given by some NPC members is we didn't have a plan in place for folding this work into the international committee. And so until we do, we have to restore them. It seems very apolitical to me to not want to talk about the politics of all of this. Like the material damage that's been done to people doing this work on the ground from this decision a hasty way we made the decision and then I'm hoping soon the NPC will have a discussion, hopefully public to members, to talk about sort of what happened here. This is like a weird 2 weeks. It's all happened within 2 weeks.
We're barely scratching the surface here. It seems there's so much to sort of catch up on and understand. But like as of now, Justin is who we also speaking with. He is going to be their liaison for the working group, and I believe also for the international committee. How are things going to be different now? Is it going to be a worse relationship than it was going forward, or what's your sense of how that's going to be moving forward? Because I've heard some murmurs that the working group is not going to be willing to work with the NPC until their leadership is reinstated.
As far as like how things are going to go, like administratively, like I don't know. We have to appoint a new steering committee. I guess this is so demoralizing. I don't know how we think that this isn't going to impact work. And I think that that's also going to be used to say that. So part of the argument for dechartering them was that they don't do national campaigns or they don't do enough work. And so the IC should take over to make sure that they're doing national campaign work. And I think that this demoralizing effect is going to be used to sort of push that narrative. But it's been 2 weeks of them like just not having any support. I mean, support from other rank and file members, but like, it's been such a demoralizing anti-solidaristic week, I think, in DSA. And I think that moving forward from this is going to take time. I just don't see them just picking up in time for, Nakba Day in May or something to push this work forward without thinking that, without a discussion or any safeguards or anything, that this can't just happen again.
What do you think is the root cause of all the conflict here? Like, what are some changes we could make to avoid, this kind of fallout in the future?
I think we need to, there's a couple fights here. I think that we need to, really grapple with the role of having, I guess, DSA members who have different constituencies than just a bunch of DSA members, right? Like, there's nowhere in the country where we elect someone into Congress and their voting base is like socialist, right? And has socialist anti-imperialist values and anti-capitalist values. And I think that we have to figure out what concessions are going to need to be made to keep a democratic socialist in office, and what concessions we're not going to make. And I think that if we are to take an electoral tactic, we want to elect our members, get our members elected into office and keep them. And how to do that when our values are obviously always on the losing end of everything. I don't know how to do that. That's something that we need to talk about, because I think that we don't grapple with that enough, and everyone gets defensive of electoral work, because when you come at it from this way, it's like saying, well, we shouldn't do this then. But how do we figure that out? But what's the point of also having someone elected into office if they're going to vote to fund something like the Iron Dome? Right. I think the root cause of this also is, and I think this all plays out very publicly, where there's this aversion to getting into a room and going okay, so what do we push forward on this? What's the narrative on this? And it's not toxic positivity, which is we all agree on everything, but how do we critically put forward a socialist program that has these tension points in a way that is productive? And then I also think a lot of people just have their feelings hurt. I think that's a big thing too. I think a lot of people just need to kind of get over some things, which is frustrating to me. I think growing up as someone who visited Reddit and Something Awful and all this stuff, I'm pretty immune to the internet. But I think that it gets very attacky and dunky and things like this. And I think people also move to a punitive measure to shut people up. I mean, there's a lot of things here. I think moving forward, there has to be some sort of, people are calling for a truth and reconciliation thing on this, but politically, we need to talk about the political ramifications of our actions. And I think that that's something we don't do. And I think my ultimate point was that I don't know if we want to be actually an organization that is anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. We'd actually need to think about what that means and how that looks in action, because having a congressman in office who is our comrade, a DSA member, who said publicly that he would vote to fund the Iron Dome, like isn't pushing forward a vision of socialism that I think should be. It's not socialism. It's not. It's pushing forward occupation and not actually fighting for not just Palestinian liberation, but just indigenous liberation on every front. And we don't talk about it. It sucks.
That's true. As a traditionalist, I like it when my socialists are socialist a lot of the time. And that's kind of the core of the issue.
I mean, it seems like even without this fracas, though, I don't even know if I'm using that word correctly.
Fracas.
That this controversy. Yeah, fracas Obama. I don't know. My sense was that like he's not going to get re-endorsed, and the argument is really over to expel or to decline to re-endorse. I mean, am I correct in that this, especially after this now, it seems like there's no chance he's going to receive another DSA endorsement?
No. Like, as of a month ago, we were told that Lower Hudson Valley was starting their endorsement process. And that is the chapter that endorsed him the first time. I don't know how, I don't know what, I mean, I think that there needs to be more than just, oh, we didn't endorse him. There needs to be like, I don't know what ever happened to actual critical support, even though this is a red line for me. But why aren't we using this to push forward a socialist message? This is, we are standing in solidarity. Everything that we say is so, it's just platitudes, right? And I think that, just saying, we need to do with more with our action. I think just not endorsing him again when a chapter most likely isn't going to be seeking re-endorsement for him to avoid all of this is really weak to me. It's really cowardly to just let this fade and die. I think that it doesn't push forward a stronger socialist vision. It doesn't push forward a line. It's really frustrating to me that Palestinian liberation groups don't want to work with DSA. And how do we turn the table on that? And how do we do that in a way that how do we support, our comrades like Cori Bush or, AOC, who are our comrades in Congress, to actually take a stand and not do something so against what I hope is against their values, because they feel they need to. And that is something we haven't even grappled with yet either.
Okay. We do need to wrap this up.
Sure.
I do have another thing that would put a button on it, but I'm afraid to lose more audio, but let's just give it a try anyway. So there's clearly a long way to go. A lot of people are upset about this in the last week, and they're, posting their feelings about it. What would you say to comrades who are upset and maybe considering leaving DSA after the events of last week?
I think really sit with that anger and find out what are you angry about? And if you're angry about that this isn't a strong anti-imperialist stance, where can you channel that into an organizing that is productive? And I think right now, for better or for worse, DSA is the spot. And how do we change that? How do we push forward for that in our democratically led organization to make actual sweeping changes, to have NPC accountability, congressional accountability? But, what can you think of materially that would look like instead of a large, Palestinian solidarity? What does that actually look like for our organization specifically? And how do we come to consensus on that? How do we create red lines together that we won't cross and we have no way to wiggle around it? How do we create ways working with our electoral working group? These are things that our electeds cannot cross, or else what's the point of electing them? And I think that if you're feeling hopeless, figure out why you're feeling hopeless, right? And sit with that, and like being a socialist or being a Marxist is so lonely. It's so alienating. You like try and talk to your friends about something like, isn't money weird? And like, they don't get it. And, think about like why you joined a political organization, why political activity is important for you, and like where locally you can find that. Because just giving up is just going to be even more alienating and more sad. Like so many people are upset about so many different things here because there's so many different fights happening around this one fracas. And just, figure out like where you can find that solidarity, because it's truly, this sounds so, but it's truly because we all want something better than what it is, like what we're doing now. And we're just betrayed and let down that like, we're not there. And so I think there's a way to fix that. Just, yeah.
So we got to turn the fracas into raucous dissent and revolt.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Okay. Jenbo from the National Political Committee, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Sorry for my audio.
It's like a DSA meeting, right?
Yeah.
We are now live with Justin Charles, New York City DSA, National NPC. Justin Charles, returning guest of the show. He's back again, folks. Very exciting. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, Alex, Anders. Good to be here.
Yeah.
First of all, I gotta say, congratulations. You are the new liaison for the BDS Working Group and the International Committee. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Many of us aspire to be a liaison.
Not that kind of liaison, but don't envy. Yeah, this whole week has underscored how glad I am I'm not on the NPC or in any official decision-making capacity. Sounds very stressful.
Somebody's got to do it, right?
Right.
Yeah, huge ups for doing that. Let's get right into it. So, last week, you voted for dechartering the BDS Working Group, the big decision that we're all yelling about now and has maybe been partially undone this week. What was the line they crossed for you, where you felt the steering committee had to be removed?
Well, I should say that this has been going on for months. And I think, to say that I voted to decharter the working group last week is kind of inaccurate. We actually took the vote about what consequences there would be for the working group not complying with national committee criteria. We took that vote at the end of February. Included in that vote, though, was, another vote that basically said, we would have another meeting with the working group to discuss, the conflict that we had. And they had also asked for a meeting in which we would try and de-escalate a bit. And the hope for that meeting was that we would be able to kind of talk through our issues before any kind of consequences were implemented. So I did vote in favor of all those consequences, but I voted in favor of all those consequences, including, dechartering and folding into the IC and suspension of the leadership, with the understanding that those were, the worst case if all else failed. We did pass all that. But I think a couple of weeks later, when we actually had a meeting, or I should say maybe it was a week later, time's a little fuzzy now. We actually had a meeting with the working group, and we had a plan going into that meeting. Several of us on the NPC, not the whole NPC, but, a kind of delegation of us. We had a plan basically to kind of like not talk about, this is all the bad stuff that can happen if you don't comply. The plan was we listened to them about their concerns because we had asked them, one, comply with the committee criteria, which includes, giving your social media credentials to the comms department. But also, there was a tweet thread that had, arguably misinformation about the NPC's kinds of, negotiations with Jamal Bowman about what we would expect of him in order to get re-endorsed. So we were going to listen to them about their concerns about that. And we were going to tell them, from our perspective, why the committee criteria is so important. And we were going to try and hear each other out because honestly, we hadn't done much talking to the working group. The last time that we spoke to the working group was in December, and we hadn't spoken to them since. Of course, they had their working group liaison, Aaron, who's now resigned from the NPC, but there had not been a ton of, I guess, relaying of information between the working group and us, and vice versa. So we had that meeting. A couple of members of the NPC who were part of that group decided to change the agenda middle of the day before that meeting. The meeting was supposed to happen in the evening. Everybody else that was on the call was super busy, myself included, and didn't really have much time to think about that agenda change. But basically, they took the discussion of what would happen if they don't comply, which was like the last thing in the agenda, and we were only going to bring up if like the call went very poorly. They decided to move that to the third item in the agenda, which basically like soured the whole thing.
Yeah, I could see
that was a big mistake. That was a huge fuck up.
Timing is everything, really.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So that went very poorly, and then the meeting was kind of whatever agenda we had was kind of out the window at that point. We tried. I think and I guess if you talk to Jenbo will talk about Jenbo had made a kind of amended version of the social media policy, which had not been, passed or agreed to by the rest of the NPC. But Jenbo, decided to bring that up on the call. We weren't ready for that. Nobody talked about that. We were just kind of freestyling it after the agenda change went very poorly. But the working group liked Jenbo's amendment, and my interest at that moment was like trying to save the situation. So I was like, yeah, let's go with Jenbo's amendment. Unfortunately, and we said we would take that back to the NPC. We took it back to the NPC. The rest of the NPC was like, no, we don't like that. So we ended up, I was trying to argue like we have not done everything we can to end this amicably. This is the second time we've talked to this working group since December. We have not done anything really to try and, de-escalate or come to any kind of reconciliation. So to me, we can't really go through with all this stuff we said we go through with because we haven't tried to do anything else. But the majority of the NPC felt differently. Some people, did not even feel that the consequences were right and didn't vote for them in the first place, but they decided because the NPC had voted on the consequences, we should go through with it. I don't understand that reasoning, but we basically took 2 more votes via email. Usually we do votes via Lumio. One was to kind of go through with the consequences and notify the working group. The other was to draft a message to put on the forums to inform membership. I did not vote on either of those. It felt kind of pointless. So then that's what happened last Friday. That went very poorly. It was very poorly received, as you can tell. That's why we're on this call right now. So that caused a whole bunch of drama.
The drama. It attracts podcasts like flies.
Yeah. But here we are today. We've rescinded at least part of our decision. One, the decision to decharter the working group we just rescinded. So the working group will exist. However, we were unable to. The vote failed to rescind the decision to suspend the steering committee. That was a tied vote.
And you say steering committee is that's the steering committee of the working group?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's their internal leadership.
Correct.
Okay.
And so that decision stands, which I think is unfortunate. I mean, people will tell you different opinions about this. I think it's unfortunate because the working group as a whole, the rank and file of the working group, has a great deal of faith and loyalty to the steering committee. And I don't think, they're not simply just going to do what we're telling them to do as the NPC. So we are basically in the same spot we were in, a few days ago, I would say.
Right. but plus a whole lot of bad vibes, which I think is worth discussing, right?
Yeah.
Just on a personal level, you've been on the NPC since this has exploded online, and you must have felt a good wave of uncomradely behavior coming out from it, to put it politically. But I wanted to ask you, do you feel like, so a lot of this tension is stemming from the entire Bowman conflict started a few months ago. How much of this conflict do you feel is interpersonal or factional, and how much is just social media poor strategy or miscommunication or just some kind of like warped dynamic going on that we can get a hold of?
I mean, I don't want to diminish or I don't want to like write off this conflict. Like, I mean, this is not just interpersonal stuff. Like, this is like serious political conflict as well as interpersonal conflict. This is rooted in the fact that DSA endorsed a candidate for Congress who, from the jump, did not align with the organization's position on Palestine. But the chapter, New York City, declined to endorse because the district overlaps both New York City's chapter and Lower Hudson Valley's chapter. New York City declined to endorse in part because more of the district is in Lower Hudson Valley's turf, but also because, our candidate questionnaire, our platform is pretty clearly pro-BDS. So we declined to endorse, but Lower Hudson Valley did endorse. Now, we also endorsed Bowman pretty late in the game, couple weeks before his election that he won. So I think part of what's happening here is there's a kind of people are interpreting the endorsement in different ways. And this is a problem for the organization in that some people read the endorsement as meaning this person is fully on board with our program, with everything that we stand for. And any kind of compromise on that is, a violation. I don't necessarily disagree with that in principle, but I think, our just, the convention that we had last summer, there were resolutions to kind of bind candidates and members to our program, to our platform, and our organizational positions, and those failed. So that is not that's not the policy of the organization that an elected who has our endorsement has to do everything in alignment with our positions.
Is the problem just the word endorsement? Do you need more words?
Maybe. I mean, I think here's the thing. I think some people read DSA as like a true, or at least a proto-party formation, and think that we should act as such. Mm-hmm. And a party formation has much more discipline over its endorsed electeds and candidates, and much tighter of a relationship. I mean, with Bowman, I think one of our working groups, the Eco-Socialist working group, collaborated with him on some legislation, the Green New Deal for public schools. But beyond that, there was no real relationship. I mean, I think some folks from the BDS working group had been in contact with some people from his staff about, his position on BDS, and asked him to kind of stop dragging BDS publicly. But the NPC had no real relationship with him up until this whole crisis happened, in which we had to kind of try and reverse engineer one. So I think there's the political problem of what does it mean to be a DSA endorsed candidate and elected? What is expected of you when you have that designation, when we've, decided that, you become associated with DSA, you can't be doing stuff that DSA doesn't stand for. Right. I think now, we have to look a little closer at our endorsement process, particularly for federal electeds. And I think another part of the political conflict here is like, some people read this as, I mean, people who are less convinced of electoral politics as being as significant a part of our strategy as it is, see this as kind of us capitulating on our principles in order to have access to some elected. I think that's not a great interpretation, but I also, to some extent, think like, you know, if this dude is not aligned with us, why are we associating with him? In particular, on an issue such as this, I think the question of red lines is not one that we should write off. I think we should have red lines as a socialist organization.
Right. I mean, for me, one of the frustrations with the whole debate, and I agree, it is a really valid debate and something we have to work through. But if we like look at it from a bird's eye view, you know, there's some exceptions. For the most part, it came down to after he went to Israel and voted for Iron Dome and all that. It came down to one side wanted expulsion immediately from the organization for Bowman, and the other side wanted to see if we could get him to move on some things, and then most likely decline to re-endorse, if that's an accurate statement. And you know, again, valid debate, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge difference, right? But it's been framed in such a way that like you're either for expelling him immediately or you're anti-Palestinian, and then there's been a lot of bad faith on the other side as well. But it's just been hard to navigate and really discuss this with people. And again, it is something we really need to figure out as an organization with all this like really charged rhetoric, I guess. And so this process with working with the WG, the BDS working group, you said you only had a couple meetings with them before this initial vote. What were those meetings like? And was it hard to reach consensus and sort of bridge that gap and have a substantive discussion with them?
I mean, we had so the NPC had one meeting with the steering committee of the working group back in December. We had also, I mean, we had a meeting with a handful of us had a meeting with Bowman, some members of his staff, and a couple members of the BDS working group, where we kind of talked about why the J Street trip, the trip to Israel, was a problem. Why meeting with Naftali Bennett, you know, somebody who says, you know, it's absolutely no problem to kill a bunch of Arabs. Why it's a problem to meet with that dude. Why the Iron Dome vote was a problem, and like what we would like to see from him. The meeting that we had, I mean, and in that meeting, you know, we had that one, and then the NBC had a couple meetings, you know, on our own with Bowman staff, and then we talked about what we would like to see from them, and the staff told us what they were capable of doing, and we said okay. And then, you know, we said to the organization, if he doesn't do the stuff that we agreed with him on, he won't get re-endorsed. We had more meetings with the BDS working group because there had been kind of, I guess, we see our role as the national political leadership. The organization is like, you know, I guess the buck stops with us to some extent. So we took meetings with Bowman's staff without the working group, which I think people were not happy about. But after that, I mean, I think when we made our decision about not expelling, you know, there was more hurt feelings and anger with us because, I mean, if the dude voted for, you know, funding to Iron Dome, which like leads directly to, you know, harm in some cases, you know, the death of people that you know, you're going to take that personally. I mean, I'm not going to fault anybody for that. This is a very tough issue. I mean, this is not just some like theoretical argument that we often have in a socialist organization. This is life and death. So it's tough. I mean, Israel-Palestine has tended to be kind of like a third rail of U.S. politics in a lot of ways. I don't think it's any different for us here. I think though that I guess like the problem is that between us and the working group is I don't know that we had the working group, and this goes back to some of their history. I mean, the working group was founded apart from our international committee because our international committee used to be kind of not that great. And I think kind of in the DNA of the working group is a kind of mistrust of the national organization because like for so long, the national organization, I mean, prior to the Bernie bump, prior to 2016, wasn't that great. Some of the remnants of some of those politics stuck around, particularly in the international committee.
The median age shifted around 40 years or something I was reading.
Yeah. But luckily in 2019, new reorganization of the international committee happened. The international committee is a totally different place now. But I think the working group still is pretty adamant about, I mean, the resolution that founded the working group, calls for it to be autonomous, and they take that seriously. I think there's a mistrust of the national organization to begin with. I think the working group is not necessarily particularly all that well integrated with the rest of the organization, which is a problem, and one I hope to try and solve as a liaison. And I think that it hasn't had like great relationships with the NPC. I think the liaison that they had last term just had too much on their plate and didn't necessarily do everything that could be done to connect them with us. And I think that's probably the case too this term up until recently. And I hope to change that.
All right. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. You're a busy guy. Just before we get out of here, I thought I should ask this. Is there anything you think we can do to improve the hostile internal culture inside DSA?
Oh, shit, man.
The turning, the snipping, the posting and slashing.
Well,
do you need more comedy shows? We're currently doing one a month.
More comedy shows would be great. I mean, I think I don't know if you pay attention to like DSA inside baseball at all, that like the 2021 convention was a shit show of just factional bullshit. And this happens generally every convention. There's some kind of, as we call it, August surprise. I think we have to get a lot better at being comrades, or even understanding what the fuck a comrade is. I feel like a lot of the people in the activist layer of the organization are absolutely dog shit at understanding what the word comrade means. We treat each other terribly. And listen, so long as we're so invested in treating each other terribly and not treating the capitalist class terribly, not treating the right, and our opponents in the liberal establishment, we got to treat them terribly. We got to do everything we can to make their lives miserable, not each other's lives. I think, and this remains a problem. It's been a problem my entire time in this organization. We have to, I think some of that comes from the very online nature of of things, and being on Twitter, and there being such a kind of DSA, its current incarnation being so tied to social media. Recognize there's a human on the other end of that avatar. recognize that human might have all sorts of goofy things that you don't like going on, but like they want socialism too, and like give people a bit of grace. There's probably some asshole out there that's going to say that I'm, naive for saying that, but I feel like so long as we keep doing this bullshit, we're not going to win anything. So learn what a comrade is and be one.
Read a book. All right. That's great to hear. Thank you, Justin, for coming on again. Last time we talked to you was Force the Vote. I look forward to having you back on the show for some other fun.
Yeah, whatever mess happens next, I'll be happy to talk to you about it.
Honey.
Wow. What an org.
Yeah, man. Quite the... Man, I'm so glad I am not a member of the National Political Committee. Do not elect me. If elected, I will not serve. Right. Sounds like hell, and I don't believe they're getting paid for this. So, man, it seems I'm just glad I'm not in any decision making capacity other than like which door to knock on. Actually, that's not even a decision you got to make either. I like
there's
not
an
having
app
to make
actually.
decisions.
I've been meaning to talk to you about that. When you do that, there's a whole way you're supposed to be doing it, but we can go over that later.
Oh, just knock on random doors.
I don't know. Did you learn anything from this enlightening discussion?
I got more confused than I was already, but we're working it out. And it's okay to not have a strong opinion sometimes, other than let's end apartheid and stop being mean to one another.
Yeah, I've turned against the state of Israel in the last hour, and that's been a big development for me.
But if you want to get involved in DSA, I think one thing everyone can agree on, and there's so much to disagree on, but one thing we can agree on is that Starbucks should be unionized. And
I keep saying this, yeah.
It's happening, folks. It's there's something like 6,000 to 9,000 stores, something like that in the country, which is smaller than I thought, actually. I assumed it was like 100,000 or something, but not a number.
I thought it was 1 million stores.
You could have easily convinced me of that, but it's I believe in the single thousands, the number of stores, and the current number.
There are more of us than there are of them.
Absolutely. Yes. Think about it. You can't have one employee for each store. There's at least two. At least two employees for each of those stores. And if we get it spreading, as is happening, there's over 100 stores that have filed, I believe, for union elections. And that's, a small fraction overall. But that number is growing and growing and growing. And DSA is helping with that. And we are part of that effort. We're not, the leaders, but we are assisting, and you can definitely get involved. And maybe if you're looking for a job, as I am, maybe we should think about working at Starbucks. Are
you going to go work at Starbucks?
I'm thinking about it. I don't know. I mean, if they really dug into my background, which they probably won't do, then they could find this episode and say, no, don't hire him.
I don't think that will happen.
Okay. Yeah,
I'll tell you what could happen, though, which is you work at Starbucks and then I use you to get free drinks. And that could be really something that builds the movement. I'm
going to sneak kratom in them.
That sounds illegal, but I think you should do it anyway.
I knew somebody who, Taco Bell, a pot dealer, worked at Taco Bell, and you would go through the drive-thru, and, number 9 would be code for deuce bag or whatever. And a dub, not a deuce bag.
Oh, a deuce bag?
I couldn't think of the term for dub. Although some people don't use dub. I remember I asked someone for a dub once. They're like, speak English.
Do you mean deuce bag?
That should be the terminology.
I don't even know what you're saying.
A 20 bag. And they would put the pot in the order. So you would get weed with your Taco Bell.
I was once trying to get mushrooms, and I asked the guy for tasty veggies, and then they gave me something totally different, and I was so disappointed.
What did they give you, like vegetable sticks or something?
They gave me like just a bunch of
chips?
like weed crumbs, and I was like, this isn't even, like I had already driven to like a mountain or whatever, and I was like, well, shit.
They're like, this is great seasoning.
I guess I'll just kill myself up here. Anyway, my plug for the week, don't quit America's largest socialist organization.
Yes.
Don't be part of it. Change it to be the way you would like it to be. There's
Also,
nowhere else to go.
Yeah, that's the thing. Without naming any names, there are people always say, oh, there's dozens, ones of these other organizations you can join. Without naming any names, most of them are far more toxic internally than DSA. Many of them are cults. Don't do it.
Don't do it, folks.
Stay in DSA.
Not even once.
And yeah, help organize Starbucks. There's going to be a call probably when this comes out. A national organizing call.
Yeah.
March 25th.
So
if you're a DSA member, you got an email about it already.
Yeah, our plug is to check your email. Next paid protest show in New York is April 15th. If you want to come for that, that will be fundraising for the IAPA campaign in Manhattan, and it's going to be dope. Daniel Simonson's on it. He's my favorite. Yeah, good stuff coming.
Two kinds of socialism in the same person, Norwegian and Chilean.
And that's what this whole campaign has been about.
Whose dad is actually a Chilean revolutionary, but that's another story.
It's a whole other story. And we're going to call it there for the week. And as we always say, I love you.
It's finished.